Hi, I'm Guy Lawrence, and you are listening to the Guy Lawrence podcast. If you're enjoying this content and you want to find out more and join me and come further down the rabbit hole, make sure you head back to guylawrence.com.au. Awesome, guys. Enjoy the show. G'day, Lynne. Welcome to the show.
It's my pleasure to be with you today.
It's absolutely fantastic. Now, Lynne, I'm going to kick off with a question that I'm really keen to hear what you answer with, that I ask everyone on the show. And that was, if a stranger sat next to you on an aeroplane and asked you what you did for a living, what would you say?
I guess I would say I give people hope.
Beautiful.
Is my job. That's what I do in my books, which merge science and spirituality. It's all about looking at our lives in a much better and more hopeful way, rather than thinking that we're lonely people on a lonely planet in a lonely universe. You know, we're so interconnected, and we have capacities far greater than we've been told. And then with my magazine, What Doctors Don't Tell You, I provide alternative ways to get well, other than the usual surgery and drugs model that's given to us by the conventional medicine.
Yeah, right. And I would imagine that would spark off a lot of conversations, just that alone. But what intrigued me, like I've been submersing myself in your work the last couple of weeks, and I was listening to a book on Audible that you narrated called Living with Intention, and I was fascinated with it. And but the first thing you said is that you were a skeptic, like you needed hard evidence, and I'm intrigued. The first bit of work I came across of you was The Field, the book, a number of years ago, which no doubt you probably recognize for. But I'm curious, how did your life lead you to researching that body of work, especially from kind of a skeptic's background, if you like?
Well, I'm an investigative reporter by training. When I was in my 20s, I was busting baby selling rings and things like that with hidden microphones and tape recorders. I segued into writing about health about 10 years after that, mainly because I got ill and I wanted to find out how to get me better. And I finally, when going from conventional doctors to alternative doctors, I found a very forward-thinking doctor. This was back in the 80s, okay. Who was really, a pioneer in nutritional non-drug medicine. And I had what people would call a faulty microbiome now, but back then nobody knew what it was. But he had been really doing a lot of work in this area, and he got me better. And it was so impressive that I started to tell everybody about it. I was so impressed by the way he dealt with patients as a partnership, not as a dictator or patient-child, or parent-child relationship. So I wanted to tell the world about it. So, and my husband said, stop telling me, let's do this. Let's actually do a publication. And so we created a publication. It was a newsletter at that time called What Doctors Don't Tell You. And it's now an international magazine. It's in 17 countries in different languages. And we write about what works and what doesn't work in conventional and alternative medicine. And, we're always looking at the medical research. So back in the early 90s, when, we had just got this newsletter off the ground, I kept coming across very good studies of things like spiritual healing. And I kept thinking to myself, wait a minute, if you can send a thought to someone else and make them better, that in itself undermines everything we think about how the world works and how we work. So I set out to try to find out why. And I thought initially, well, I'll speak to some frontier scientists who are doing work in consciousness and things. And they'll tell me there's something like human energy fields, and I'll write it up, and that'll be that, and I'll hand it in, and job done. Well, it wasn't like that at all. What I discovered, and was shocked to discover, was that each of these people, each of these scientists had discovered a tiny piece of what compounded into a completely new view of the world. Nevertheless, as scientists, they don't like to stray beyond their own experimental evidence. They don't want to speculate on what this all means. What's the big picture? And they also don't know how to decode it into real English. You know, they speak in code, they speak in math.
Totally.
So it was my job really to try to decode what they were talking about and then to synthesize it and put it all together. So I did. And that book really did change the messenger. That book really set me on this journey because I realized we are very different from what we've been told. The newest science is telling a very different scientific story. And that science, in fact, is just a story. You know, we act as though it's this finite truth, and that a lot of our story has already been written, but new chapters come along all the time that rewrite the chapters that came before. So this new chapter, loads of chapters are now being written. It's just extraordinary what's being discovered. And so that really changed my view of the world. But there was one part of it that was quite, excuse me, a little bit of unfinished business for me, which was the whole idea that thoughts are a thing that affect other things. There was plenty of scientific evidence about this, but I kept thinking to myself, you know, and this was the time where we were hearing a lot about the law of attraction, early part of the millennium.
Okay.
You know, that and The Secret and things like that. But I, as a reporter by training, had a lot of inconvenient questions, like, how far can we take this? You know, are we talking about just shifting a quantum particle by a fraction, or are we talking about curing cancer with our thoughts? You know, and also, what happens when lots of people are thinking the same thought at the same time? So I decided to put it to the ultimate test. And I set up a thing called the intention experiment. Because I thought, well, I've got lots of readers. The field was in 30 languages. And I thought, well, and I also know a lot of these scientists now from writing the field and doing consciousness research. If I just put them together, I'll have the biggest global laboratory in the world. So that's what we did. But I was suspicious. I didn't really think it was going to work. I wrote in a lot of qualifiers in my book, The Intention Experiment, which was, you know, not only a book about intention, but an invitation to take part in this thing. But we've run 30 to date where we've got the experimental results. And of those 30, 26 have shown measurable, positive, mostly significant effects.
I got to ask you, Lynne, how would you define intention?
Okay, that's a great question. A lot of people think of intention as that focused thought we have when we, you know, are in a meditative state. We send it, and that's the one thing the universe hears. But, you know, the science shows that we are at our lowest level, not a batch of electrical signaling and chemistry, but a network of quantum relationships, of quantum frequency. And that our thoughts are another kind of frequency that gets sent out and heard. I mean, there's certainly a lot of evidence from the work of, say, the late Fritz Albert Popp, a German physicist, showing that we send out a tiny current of light. He called them biophoton emissions. And other living things send that light back synchronicitously. So you and I are not just having a conversation, we're having a conversation of light as well, sending back and forth. So the bottom line is we are all leaky buckets. We are all sending and receiving all the time. And there is other evidence demonstrating that thoughts aren't locked inside our head, but are being transmitted, and also we are receiving back. So we're like a television set and a television station, all rolled into one. We're senders and receivers. Our brains are essentially a receiving and transmitting mechanism.
Yeah, it's
for this constant conversation.
It's incredible. It's incredible. What kind of experiments did you do out the 26 out of the 30? Can you give us a couple of examples, what you saw?
Sure. We had to start out small. I mean, the scientists, I wanted to cure cancer, and the scientists kept saying, no, let's start with leaves. And so we had to start with very basic experiments, seeing if we could change something in a biological process, because this had never been done before. So we started with just trying to change those light emissions in a leaf. Then we moved on to trying to make seeds grow faster. And then we moved on to trying to purify water, and eventually to doing experiments trying to lower violence in war-torn areas. and finally to try to heal an individual who was a Gulf War veteran with post-traumatic stress disorder. And just to give you an idea of the kinds of stuff we were discovering, let's take the seed experiment, because we did that the most of anything. We did that 12 times. And what the scientists from the University of Arizona would do would be to get 4 sets of seeds, 30 seeds each, label them A, B, C, D, take photos of them, send them to me, and then I would either invite my audience around the internet, or if I was actually speaking in front of an audience, invite them to send an intention to one of the sets of seeds. We would choose them randomly. We wouldn't tell the scientists which one we'd chosen. We'd send intention to the seeds, and then I'd tell the scientists, we're done, and they would then plant all 4 sets of seeds, measure them 5 days later, and only then would I unblind the study and say, oh, it was seeds A or B or whatever it was.
Got it.
Now, let's just look at this. First time we did this, I was in Australia. I was in Sydney, Australia, in front of an audience of 700. The seeds are sitting back in a lab in Tucson, Arizona. Nevertheless, we had an effect, and those seeds that we sent intention to grew significantly higher than the controls. So we were 8,000 miles away from those seeds, and nevertheless, we had an effect. Also, we weren't sending intention to the seeds, we were sending intention to a photographic representation of those seeds. So to me, that was just astounding. And by the way, in those 12 experiments, every time we did them, the seeds sent intention grew significantly higher than controls. Whether it was, I had audiences in New York, in South Carolina, in LA, and Dallas. I also had people over the internet, scattered around the globe on the internet, sending intention. And every single time, the seeds sent intention grew significantly higher than controls. So that, to me, was fascinating because it demonstrated we have a kind of psychic internet that can affect things by focusing on them, by collective focus, no matter how far away we are, no matter whether we're sending it to the thing itself or just a symbol of the thing. But that's astounding in itself, but not really the interesting part of the story, to be honest.
Please keep going, keep going.
Well, the interesting part of the story really had to do with 2008. Later that year, I decided I was a little tired of seeds and water and leaves. We had done a lot of those experiments. So I said to I got together a scientific team and I said, let's do something huge. Let's try to lower violence in a war-torn area. So I was looking around the globe for a good place, and I found Sri Lanka, which had a 25-year ongoing war. And the reason I chose it is that the scientists wanted me to have a place where we had at least 2 years worth of weekly data on injuries and deaths prior to our experiment, and the ability to collect it reliably afterward for a couple of months. Because you can't just measure if violence goes down for a week afterward, it's meaningless. You've got to look at a long-term trend and see if you buck the trend. If it's been going up and it suddenly goes down and stays down, that starts becoming compelling. So we did choose Sri Lanka. We sent intention. It was a fascinating result. Violence actually quadrupled during the week of our experiment, and then it plummeted. But here's the interesting part. And yes, we did buck the trend. It went lower than that, and it had been going up consistently, and it went down. But that wasn't the interesting thing. The interesting part of it was that week, when we were sending intention and violence quadrupled, the government won a number of decisive battles that turned around the entire course of the war. And they had been essentially losing. The rebel forces had the entire North captured and cut off. And the government was able to reclaim that. And then within 5 months after that, this intractable 25-year war was over. Right. So did we do this? Short answer, who knows? The scientist, Dr. Jessica Utz, who's a professor of statistics at the University of California, said, she demonstrated with a statistical analysis that we'd bucked the trend. But, you know, all she could say when I said, well, wow, that very week of our intention was the most important week of the entire 25+ year war. And she said, well, weird, isn't it? Weird, huh? So that was weird. But what was even weirder was what came back from the participants. I had about 25,000 people.
I was going to ask how many people there were.
Yeah, there were about 25,000 people. And I had them fill out a form afterward telling me how it was for them. And I basically wanted to find out if they'd were able to come onto the internet and it had been a good experience for them. And what ended up happening is I got back thousands of responses saying things like this. I felt I was part of a higher network. I was tingling and sobbing uncontrollably. I felt like there was electricity coursing through my body. I felt like I was in the tractor beam in Star Trek, you know, and it stopped as soon as the experiment finished. Now remember, these weren't even people in the same room. These were people in front of their computer screens by themselves, having this extraordinary experience of connection, of mystical experience, of some sort of altered state, just by taking part in this thing. So that was weird, but what was also weird is what happened in their lives. They reported essentially that their lives had become more peaceful. They had made up with people they had been estranged from. And this was thousands of responses, again, to this survey. They were getting along better with their coworkers, their family, their not so nice bosses. They were in love with, I think more than 40% said they were in love with everyone they came into contact with. They were hugging strangers. You know, I'm saying to myself, what on earth is going on here? There had to be, I started realizing there was some weird mirror effect, because as I ran the experiment, if the focus was peace, their lives became more peaceful. If the focus was healing someone, we had thousands of people on a healing experiment for this Gulf War veteran with PTSD, and I got back answers like this. You know, I had terrible arthritis and it doesn't hurt anymore. I have Crohn's disease and my gut feels normal. I'm getting over my own anxiety. You know, hundreds and hundreds of responses like this, where people themselves were getting healed. There was something in this whole thing of a group prayer, which is essentially what it was, that was healing the participants, the senders, as well as the receivers.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Wow. So from there, you've done that. This was back in, you said 2008. This huge experiment. You're getting that kind of feedback back, and I'm fascinated from that, because that would blow my mind if I was part of that experiment and you're seeing that. Then, what made you decide to take it to groups of 8 people? So you've gone from seeds to mass to 8.
And, you know, when you said, by the way, it blew, you know, it would blow my mind. Well, it blew my mind. And that's why it's taken me 10 years to publish this book, because for a long time, I didn't believe it. I didn't know what to do with it. I had to understand it. I had to study it. I had to think about it. I didn't want to tell anybody about it, you know. So I told my community a bit, but kept it low key.
For sure.
The groups of 8 came about by total accident. It was 2008 still. We'd run some of those experiments. And I thought to myself, well, people like, you know, when they do this kind of thing, they have workshops. I guess I should run a workshop. But remember, I'm a journalist by training. I'm a hard-edged reporter. So I'm not sure how to run a workshop. And I'm thinking, well, how do you show people that they can manifest stuff? Obviously, we were getting these this amazing outcome with these experiments. But how do we demonstrate this can affect you personally? You know, you can't very well manifest a new job over a weekend. So I'm sitting there with my husband. He's also a journalist, works with me on What Doctors Don't Tell You. He runs the company. And we're talking about it. And I said, well, I don't know. Maybe I'll just put them in groups of 8 and have them send healing intention to some member of the group with a health challenge. And he goes, yeah, I like that, the power of 8. And, you know, that's how it came about. So we for our first workshop in Chicago, we put people into groups. We asked them to choose a member of the group with a health challenge. All come up with the same intention, all hold hands. Now, I had studied for my book, The Intention Experiment. I'd studied with intention masters, Qigong masters, master healers, Buddhist monks. So I knew the various techniques that they used for intention. Some of them were individual and some of them were common among these different disciplines. And between that and the science of what had worked with intention in the lab, I formulated a thing I call powering up, which is a distillation of those practices that seem to maximize intention. So I knew all about that, but I didn't know what a group process like this should do and how it should work. So I'm telling them, well, they all have to hold hands, all have the same intention statement, visualize the person. I'm making it up as I go along. I don't know. And so I expect it's going to feel like somebody got a back rub, like a facial, a nice little feel-good exercise. So the next day we tell them, come back and just tell us how it was for them, expecting they'll say, I felt nice and relaxed. I had a good night's sleep last night. That's not what happened. What happened is we hand them the microphone in turn and they say one after another, my knee is killing me all the time with terrible arthritis and it feels normal and I'm walking normally today. I have terrible IBS. I always have a bad stomach. It's been normal from last night. I have headaches every day of my life and the headaches are gone. And so it went on. I have cataracts and they are 80% better. That was one woman. I mean, we were just sitting there shocked, thinking, oh my God. And also discounting it. The journo skeptic in me was saying, oh, this is just a placebo effect. It's just expectation. It's nothing to do with the procedure itself. But every time I did this, and I've done this hundreds and hundreds of times since, every single time, groups with workshops and conferences, people have announced incredible healings. There was a woman with scoliosis where her daughter wrote me afterward to say that her back had straightened so much that they had to change her rear view mirror. There was a woman who was a stroke victim who couldn't visualize, she couldn't focus her eyes after her stroke. And after her intention, being the subject of her intention, she could focus normally. There was a guy who showed up with a brace. He could hardly move his arm. And the next day, he had the brace off. He was moving it normally. There were people with terrible back pain, arthritis, walking normally. A woman with MS who showed up the next day without her crutches. And on and on and on and on. With me so shocked and not knowing what to make of this. And also continuing to say, oh, placebo effect, until I realized that a number of the people getting healed were the senders. They weren't even the receivers.
Wow. So are you got the 8 people. Are you then, is one person being selected to send the intention to?
Mm-hmm.
And then what are they feeling when it's going on?
All kinds of things. I asked people to report back after it. And remember, this is just, we're doing this for 10 minutes in a conference. People are just in groups of 8 or in my workshops, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. It's not hours, and it's not sort of getting in the mood for it. I just put people in groups, they do it. The person getting it will say any number of things, feeling enormous energy, enormous heat, shaking, crying, a lot of shaking, crying, a lot of that part of their body that they're trying to heal, feeling instantly better, feeling a little worse, and then feeling better. There's all kinds of things, but there's definitely an incredible reaction.
Okay, so you know something's going on when you're in there.
Oh, yeah, but the senders do too. The senders talk about incredible connection, feeling like they're in an altered state, intense visualizations, because I asked them just to visualize that person being healed. And the same for the person themselves, visualize yourself being healed. And they'll get all kinds of visualizations. They'll also get common visualizations, which is very cool.
Wow.
One time I had a situation where they were trying to heal some woman of back pain, and they all imagined this white light with her spine coming out. They all imagined the same image of her spine coming out and being infused with light and then going back in her body.
Amazing. That's amazing. That is amazing. Is it a skill that you can learn, or is it something that people can just turn up and go, right, we got 8 of us, let's give this a go? What have you found over the years when doing this?
There's a certain skill in becoming a good intender. I mean, I run an intention master class once a year. I have people come in and I teach for 6 weeks. And then I put people into groups and I monitor them. I send them challenges. I basically work with them over the year. And then we do a couple of bonus calls, etc. So I'm teaching them what sorts of things I know work best. And I'll give you one example. What's really important from my experience, is being specific. Most people have very general intentions. They'll say things like, I want to be rich. And they won't say, well, actually, I don't necessarily want loads and loads of money. What I want is a new job. What I want is to have more time to be with my children or grandchildren. What I want is time to pursue my hobbies. What I want is just a little freedom. You know, it's not necessarily but I think the money will do it. And that's not really what they want. So you need to tell the universe what you really want. Be very specific about it. You know, I had a group recently in a master class that said, oh, we're all intending together to win the lottery. And I said, oh, okay. Pretty poor odds on that one, aren't there? What do you really want? Why do you want to do that? And they said, well, Jane over here needs a bit more money than she has to take care of her daughter. And Joe over here wants to buy a new car. And I said, well, why aren't you intending for Jane to get the money she needs, exactly what she needs, and Joe to get exactly what he needs for the car? Why are you asking for something nebulous like this? You know, and also throwing it together. So that's a really important thing. But when you said years of training, many of the things that I had to do to convince myself were to actually study why this works. And I was very fortunate in 2015, Life University, which is the largest chiropractic university in the world, I had spoken there, and they offered to put their neuroscience department at my disposal, and psychology department, so we could study these groups. And I went, oh, that's so fantastic. So we did our first study, and the first study was of 7 groups. And we only got student volunteers. And we put them into groups, and we monitored what was going on with the senders. And here's what happened. Almost immediately, they had big brainwave changes that were a turning off of a lot of the parts of the brain, just a really big quieting of the parts of the brain that distinguish between self and not self. So like the parietal lobes located around here, they orient us into space. They tell us how to navigate by saying, well, this is where I am, that's where the rest of the things, you know, the universe begins. And that was turned way down. So were the frontal lobes, particularly the right frontal lobe, which is the executive function, but also the part of the brain, part of the executive function, but part of the brain. So that's the thing that really is doing a lot of the cognitive thinking. But it's also the part of the brain that's involved with worry, doubt, negativity, turned way down. So these were essentially people experiencing an ecstatic state of oneness. In fact, their brainwave signatures were absolutely identical to those of Andrew Newberg, Dr. Andrew Newberg, when he studied Sufi masters and Buddhist monks in ecstatic prayer. But unlike those types of people, where getting into that state takes years of discipline and training and hours of priming to get into the state, my people were total novices. Most of them had never even meditated before. And all they had in terms of instruction was a 13-minute video from me telling them the rudimentaries of what to do.
Why do you think that is? Like, is it the
Well, the book, the entire book is all about why this is.
Right.
I think there's a number of things that go on. There are undeniably group effects. You know, when people get together in a group, they merge, their brainwaves start mimicking each other. We know this from lots of other studies. And there's what the famous psychologist, French psychologist, Émile Durkheim used to called it a collective effervescence. There's something that happens when people come together in a group. That's one thing.
Yeah.
Two, of course, there's the power of intention and collective intention, which we've seen is very powerful. But three, and something almost never talked about, is the power of altruism. The getting off of yourself. The fact that people are sending to someone else, that has an extraordinary powerful effect. And I can explain this best with a couple of anecdotes. There was a guy called Wes who was in a group of mine last autumn. He was a Vietnam vet. He was American. This was in Denver. Wes had wanted to be a scientist, and he was at university studying to be a scientist, and going into his final year when he got drafted. And at that time, there was no lottery. You couldn't opt out. He had to go. So it was so traumatic for him that he came home very depressed. He never finished his college degree, and he just went into a downward spiral. His life just really kind of kept going downwards. There was only one little light spark when he married his second wife, and then she got cancer and died, and he spent a couple of years driving long distance in a truck just to pay back the extraordinary medical expenses. In America, there's no national health service. So his life, he'd got to the point, at the point I met him, at the age of 65, where he was basically just saying to himself, what's the use? He was living in an apartment in a senior area, and it was hard for him to even get out of bed. He had trouble even making breakfast for himself. So he was part of this group because he belonged to a church called the Mile High Church in Denver. And I got together 2 sample groups there. And for his group, he decided not to put himself forward because there was a woman there with cancer, and he felt, well, she's more deserving. So he didn't want to just talk about his depression, so he sent to her. Then he contacted me a couple of days later and said, it's unbelievable. I bound out of bed in the morning. The grass is greener than it's ever been. The flowers look more beautiful than they ever have. I suddenly have all this energy. And then he wrote me a few months later to say, I'm doing power walking for 90 minutes. I'm lifting weights. I feel like I'm still a young man. I have the energy of a young man. I've started writing. I started doing this. And he said, and I had this weird dream. It was not even put into words, but a feeling where he was on a bridge and he met his 19-year-old self, who said to him, there's still time, or somehow communicated to him, there's still time. So his life had totally transformed by the act of sending, not receiving. Amazing. So I know, amazing. But when you look at the studies of altruism, you see that altruism is like a bulletproof vest. People who give in any capacity live longer, are happier, are healthier in every regard. And that is demonstrated over and over again. Because what it does is it has a profound effect on a thing called the vagus nerve, which is the longest nerve in the body, goes from the neck, lines through all of the major organs, and it turns on a lot of the things in the body involved in compassion, like the release of oxytocin, the love hormone, as they call it, and which gets released when we're caring for a young child or something. And what it does is it sort of has this virtuous circle effect on the immune system. It just keeps improving it. So that's one effect. It also makes us much more tolerant of people not like us, more compassionate in the world. So it has this enormously positive effect. That's the physical thing going on with altruism. There's a lot of other things happening too mentally.
Yeah, totally. I'm gobsmacked here with what I'm hearing at the moment. Somebody listening to this that might be hearing this for the first time and not even thought about intention before or anything, you might raise their eyebrows slightly. They're like, going, really? What? You know, is there any kind of small experiment somebody could just go off and do to start with? Just to say, okay.
Oh, yeah, I have plenty of experiments in my book. Well, first of all, they should know that aside from that brainwave study that we did, we also did a year-long experiment where I took 250 people, had them go through my masterclass experience for 6 weeks, and then put them into small groups and monitored them month by month over an entire year. Now, of the groups that stayed together, that were working consistently together, that was about 150 people. Of those 150 people, pretty much 100% of them had major life transformations. They got over, there was one woman who had 15 years of chronic fatigue, got over it. There was a guy who's a clinical psychologist, imagine how embarrassing this is, who suffered from lifelong suicidal depression. And he'd never actually tried to act on it, but he had moments of real depression. And he asked his group to send intention to find the cause of it. And soon after, went to see a practitioner and discovered that one of his liver filtration systems wasn't working. And in resolving that, his depression lifted. It was extraordinary. He had been trying to find any kind of cure for years and years and years. And there were many stories like healing stories. There were loads of people who had new startups that were doing really well. New jobs, dream jobs coming to people, even in their 50s. There were people who needed money and got incredible windfalls just when they needed it. Surprise amounts from the bank. One woman was down to her last 200 pounds, from the UK, and suddenly gets this letter saying you qualify for a certain kind of funding from Lloyd's of London as a former employee. Never knew anything about it. Extraordinary stories like this. But there were a few that weren't having that to begin with. So one of them was Andy. And Andy was she was getting a divorce. She was trying to get a new job. She had sold her gift store. She didn't know what on earth to do. She was just kept getting rejected. And she was a very bright, positive woman. And so we were trying all kinds of things with her in the groups. And I finally just said, I was a little exasperated, Andy, just get off of yourself. Stop intending for yourself, intend for someone else. And I had just been notified by about a young boy who was 15 years old named Luke, who had just broken up with his girlfriend, his first serious girlfriend. And so he, in a fit of adolescent angst, he had thrown himself off a 40-foot structure onto hard ground. And he broke every bone in his body. He had nerve damage and brain damage. And, his stepfather wrote me in and said, please do an intention for him. So we set up a healing visual among the masterclass groups. And we sent intention for Luke over and over again for about, I think it was 3 consecutive times, while his stepfather gave us a running commentary of his reactions after the intentions. And Luke healed and got out of the hospital in record time. Now, that could have been, and a lot of the times of intention showed a big shift, some physical shift, some mental shift. Maybe that was good doctoring. Maybe that was us. I know it wasn't a placebo effect because unlike his parents, Luke, being a typical teenager, thought the power of intention was pretty stupid.
Okay.
But the most interesting thing is what happened to Andy, because Andy, the moment she got off of herself and started intending for Luke that next week, she gets a call out of nowhere, out of the blue, and it's for a dream job. And this happened over and over and over again. So it also indicated to me there was something about the power of getting off yourself that was really, really important here. And that's something we don't hear much in the self-help movement because it's just, look at the term, self-help,
We're focused on what am I doing wrong?
Number one, yeah, exactly. But what my work shows is some of the biggest transformation occurs when you get off of yourself and, start intending for someone else.
Yeah. How much is science looking at this right now? Well,
science has done a lot of work on altruism. when you said, for someone who doesn't believe, what about experiments? There was one very interesting experiment that was kind of similar in one way. It was a study of depression. And this was a psychologist who was also a priest. He wanted to see whether you could use prayer to heal a mental illness. You know, there's been plenty of studies of prayer used to heal physical illnesses, and some pretty good results in a number of the studies. There's about 150 studies in total. But it'd never been used for mental illness. So he gathered together 400 volunteers, all of whom had depression. He put them into two groups. Had one group be the people who were receiving the prayer, and the other group were trained in how to give prayer. They were trained in how to pray. And so afterward, he looked at all kinds of parameters to see if anybody had improved. The people who got the prayer, they did better. They were all better. They were, much improved, but not as improved as the people who did the praying. They were off the charts improvement. So that was, the psychologist had to admit that giving prayer is more powerful than receiving. It's more transformational. The other experiment that is very interesting about all of this looked at people who were living the good life. We'd call it people who were living the American dream. They had a lot of money, they were going on a lot of holidays, they were pleasure seekers, they were enjoying the good life. And they looked at their immune systems and they were shocked to discover these people had terrible immune systems. They were candidates for heart attacks, diabetes, Alzheimer's, all those degenerative diseases. And then they looked at another group who were less affluent, but who were living a life of service. They had extraordinary, robust immune systems. These people were going to live forever. And that's really what it comes down to, is the whole idea of a life of purpose, a life of service. That is an extraordinary, powerful healer. And that's just something that never gets talked about in self-help.
Yeah, totally. It's interesting, Lynne, as I've moved into a new direction in life, which is definitely of more of service and getting the message out there and actually trying to empower people themselves, it's so rewarding on a personal note. It's, this chalk and cheese to when I was doing something I hated, which I did for 10 years. And
oh, yeah,
it has to affect you. There's no doubt about it,
Sure, absolutely.
Well, one question that popped in there as well was, if thoughts are a thing and it can be that powerful, then what does that tell us about us, the way we think about ourselves quite often, and the negative loops that we're telling ourselves every day, or can be?
Well, this is one thing that I teach, is that you have to start monitoring what you're thinking all the time, because you're beaming it out 24/7. The universe is hearing all of that. And all of your negative self-talk, all of your judgmental things about everyone else, all the flotsam and jetsam going through your head all the time, and all those mendacious things you think about everybody else and yourself, that all collectively becomes your life's intention. That's what you're beaming out to the world. That's what you're broadcasting.
Yeah, and it becomes so habitual, we don't even know we're doing it half the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
amazing. Now, I'm aware of the time, Lynne, and I've got a few questions for you that I'll wrap up with the show. But with your book, The Power of Eight, which I've got beautiful cover, by the way, I absolutely love it.
Thank you, me too.
Everything that we've discussed today is pretty much in your book, I'm guessing, right? Totally. I'm about a third of the way.
Yeah, in the main, yes, and more, of course. And you talked about how to do it. We have instructions how to do it. Experiments where I have experiments in the book where you can embed a thought in water and see if other members of your group can pick it up. I do that little experiment a lot. That's a whole other story. Water is a tape recorder of water. Has got all kinds of physical properties that are unlike anything else. And one of the things it does is its molecules polarize around any other charged particle and essentially tape record it. And so what we found is you can embed thoughts into water and they can be picked up by other people. I have experiments in there about making plants grow faster and lots of other fun things you can do with a group. and everything about how to set up a group. And of course, all of the science to support all of this.
Brilliant. I'm definitely going to try a couple, that's for sure. I'll let you know how it goes.
Please do. That's wonderful.
Thanks. Well, look, I've got a couple of questions for you that I ask everyone on the show.
Sure.
And just going off topic slightly, but I'd be curious to see your answers. And one I've been asking everyone is, what's one of your maybe low points in life, but has later on turned into be a blessing?
Oh, that's a great one. Yeah, pretty much everything. This is the great thing about as you get older, you have a rear view mirror, and it tells you that your life was perfect and everything you needed to have happen happened. So my low point, I suppose, was getting divorced first time around. My marriage was only 2.5 years. I'd moved over to the UK after starting a book here and just falling in love with the place. I met my first husband, we got married, and that all blew up in my face. And I thought, oh my God, that was really one of my lowest points, that I'd made such a bad choice in my own head. Except, and I was also working at a job as an editor I hated, but it led me to the love of my life, who was a fellow editor there, my husband, Bryan, and we've been together for 33 years since. So, yeah, so it was, it was an extraordinary thing that happened. A bad thing turned into an amazing good thing.
Yeah, love it, love it. The next question is, if you could have dinner with anyone tonight from any time frame at all,
oh wow,
who would it be and why?
Oh, that's such a hard question. It's a choice between somebody like one of the quantum, somebody like Heisenberg, to talk to him about what he thinks about quantum physics and where it's gone, or Niels Bohr, and Jesus. I mean, because Jesus, I'd like to know from Jesus, was he happy with what they did with the church? Or did he have different plans for it? Because what I found, and it's in my book, The Power of Eight, was that there was a mistranslation in the Bible about how he explained how to pray. The way it's been translated is he told the apostles to pray with one accord, which is a very lame expression. What he actually said in the Hellenic Greek, or at least according to the initial words, is he used the term they used a term homothumedon, which is a Hellenic Greek, which the Bible was in originally. And that's a musical term that means passionately with one voice. So Jesus was essential, and it's mentioned about 15 times in the Acts, the part of the Bible that describes the apostles getting together after Jesus supposedly ascended, and they were starting up the church. And it means he was constantly telling them, when you pray, all pray together passionately with one voice, and you will heal and you will be able to be healed. And so I kept wondering, this to me was, because I was looking for an antecedent, lots of antecedents to why this Power of Eight stuff works. And that fascinated me and suggested potentially that he was trying to transmit this power people we hold when we're in a small group and we're praying together. So I would love to ask him, is that what you meant?
That would make a great dinner conversation. Last question, Lynne. What is one thing about yourself most people wouldn't know?
Ooh, I don't know. I think what you see is what you get a little bit. I don't talk too much about my children. I have 2 grown-up daughters, and they are fabulous, and they are an interesting petri dish of their own, because one of them is biological and one of them is adopted from Russia. So I've had 2 different experiences as a parent, and they have both been amazing. And one's 21, one's 28, and they are gorgeous, gorgeous girls. So I guess in my heart, I'm a very, very close family person. I cook dinner for everybody every night. And we are very, very close as a family. So maybe I don't talk about that because I don't want them have any kind of public life
Yeah.
unless they choose it. But that's a really essential part to me.
Yeah, I love it, Lynn. Love it. And everything we covered today, is there anything you'd like to, I guess, finish on for our listeners to ponder on? To close?
Just, form your own group, Power of Eight. If you don't have 8 people, read my book and find out how. We have a section of my website, lynnmctaggart.com/forum, where people can join their own and make their own Power of Eight groups. We've got hundreds forming. People just let other people know about where they are in their time zone, and other people join in, and you meet each other on Skype. And in my experience with my master classes, most of my master class members have these transformational experiences, and they've never actually physically met each other. They've just worked together on Skype. And of course, the other thing I'd love to say is once a year I do a retreat, and I'm doing a fantastic retreat in Tuscany this year. And I will be not only running an intensive for Power of Eight groups and intention in the mornings, but in the afternoon, we get to go to Florence and San Gimignano and Siena and the County Trail, and it's all in this beautiful villa with a spa and a pool. So if you'd like to find out more, that's, I think, September 30th to October 6th. Go on globalj.org or check out my website, lynnmctaggart.com, under events, and you'll find out more.
That sounds phenomenal. You might just see me there, Lynn, I promise you. And I just want to tell everyone as well about your book, The Power of Eight. I ordered it on Book Depository, of all things, from the UK, and it arrived here in Australia within a week. So easy place to get it. And I'm loving it, absolutely loving it. Lynn.
Thank you so much.
Amazing. I'll link to all the show notes for everyone anyway. But wow, that was fascinating. That was absolutely brilliant. And yeah, I just want to acknowledge you, Lynn, for everything you do. And I'm so glad in 2008, or you took 10 years to get the Power of Eight out there, but you did it and got it out there and getting this message out, because it's absolutely fascinating and it's changing lives. And I look forward to delving into this work more.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time today, Lynn. Cheers.
Thank you. Thank you.